Hello, everyone. We are really glad to welcome you here to our webinar today. And it is called Children and Educators Who Are Suffering a Crisis, and What Might We, all of us here, do about it? It has become really clear that this COVID period is making a critical new chapter in the field of education, and its potential impact is going to be well beyond the crisis that we are facing right now. And we all also have our own encounters and stories with the crisis. And we do definitely need some help and experience sharing, ideas sharing, and practice sharing with all that so that we can really deal with what we're facing. And during this hour, we will get to really the basics of some concepts and strategies that would help us to nourish and face the challenges. And so we have also invited 3 wonderful people to join the conversation tonight. And from all of them, you will be able to ask your questions. So please feel free to use the chat option also next to the broadcast. But I will go on with introducing us all very briefly, and then we shall go on also with our first speaker today. And our webinar will be about an hour. So please do make best of this opportunity to speak and engage with the speakers and also among each other on the side over the chat. So for the webinar, we have invited people from 3 different perspectives to speak to us. So we have got Greta Arro, who is from the academic background. She's the educational psychologist from the University of Tallinn in Estonia. And she's also a very popular national level speaker and advocate for true learning that makes the best sense. Then secondly, we have the founder and CEO of Clanbeat, Kadri Tuisk, who will be talking about the opportunities that EdTech can also present in the times of COVID and the challenges. And then lastly, and our first speaker will be Kathleen Nagli, who is the leader of Helsinki's International School in Finland. And with these introductory words, I would like to pass on the word directly to you, Kathleen, so that you can kick it off by experience sharing and really getting us to the field of what's happening on the school level and with your concrete ideas and strategies.
Thank you, Trine. So let me first say that I recognize that depending where you are in the world, depending on the school community or public or private sector you're in, the context of this discussion is really dependent on what you're facing. So tonight I want to speak a little bit about kind of the macro issues of this topic of this crisis we're in, and also some of the possible details that we have done that might be useful to you, or some ideas that might be useful to you. And I encourage you to enter into the chat with possible ideas. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that we are in a mass trauma event. A mass trauma event is usually in the literature seen as something that happens to a community that stops the overall normal way of life after a massive earthquake, natural disasters, war, and such. COVID, as we are experiencing now, is a mass trauma global event. And the general techniques that we would recommend to others about taking care of student well-being and taking care of your own well-being are different under this context. So I think we have to look at different areas to be well-informed as to what we might do in schools during such an event. So imagining that we are in a wartime-like environment, what does that mean for learning? What does that mean for well-being? Some of the learnings that we have from a historical experience shows that when a community can come together and help serve each other's needs, that community does better under these sorts of circumstances than those communities which remain isolated and separate. So they even shown this with prisoners of war. If a prisoner of war is able to connect with other prisoners through tapping on the wall or through signaling or other pieces where they can create some kind of underground community, that individual is more likely to survive and thrive in such a horrifying experience. When you have groups of people who remain super isolated and do not seek the help of others, we can see mental well-being for those individuals declines rapidly. Many of us have been seeing this with some of our students now. Somehow they disappear from the radar. They disappear from your classroom. They're turning off their screens if you're in distance learning. You stop seeing them. You stop having access to them. So one of the things that we have to think about is what is happening in your community to make sure that you're bringing your community back together, and that you're finding those members of your community. And if you live in parts of America in which your community is scattered at the moment, or you're losing touch with those members, that has to be the first task, is to find your people. Find your people and find ways that you're starting to bring them back together. If you do already have a community that is sticking together and working together, then we start to bring things down to a smaller level of down to your classroom possibly, or other smaller units. But my first message to school leaders and those who have influence over what's happening in your school, the first thing I would say again is find your people and bring your people back in. And that might mean doing things differently than you've done before. That might mean trying to send people to, look in neighborhoods and find out what happened to those children. It might mean contacting people differently, but you got to bring first a lifeline to those individuals. For those who are in classrooms, either in contact teaching in some kind of strange socially distanced way, or you're doing in distance learning, you have to think about the smaller unit of your community and think about then, how do we create community in a small environment when you have those under extreme stress? My history as an educator started in more difficult areas. I worked with those of the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. I have experienced in urban Southern California in poor neighborhoods. I worked with the rural poor of West Virginia. I understand what those students were bringing to the table each day was already situations of trauma and of hardship. So what worked then works now in this situation, which is more expansive as compared to other parts of the world. So what would work in those communities, what works in your classroom, what works with Zoom and other places, is to find a way to make sure that if you are the person in front of others, if you are the teacher, for example, that you have to understand you have incredible powers of leading the group towards emotional pathways. We know from neuroscience that there's this experience called neuroception, where my positive attitude, my presence with others can lead the neural pathways of those in the group. So this is a strange understanding that we have about neuroscience. We call this neuroception pathways that we have, but we have power to influence others. So as a teacher, bringing your present self, bringing your engaged self to a meeting, to a group with intention is going to be really important to help them be guided through this experience. I was recently listening to a podcast of Dolly Parton, and she spoke about that we need to stand sturdy. And I think this phrase really struck me. What does it mean to be a leader, a teacher, and stand sturdy for others? Part of that is helping them, guide them through hard times. For those of us who are a little bit older than others, our experience has given us the ability to self-manage, the ability to have resilience and to consider personal pathways in which I can share to others about how I got through difficult circumstances. Some of those ways has to do with being an individual who's ready to share your vulnerability and the struggles you have had. Many of you in the US have had the experience of grief during this COVID time period. And children are experiencing as well. And they may have never experienced grief in their lifetime. Whereas many of us who are a little bit older have, unfortunately have lost many people in our lives. We know the experience of grief, but you might have a 10-year-old in your class and this is their first experience. They've lost their grandmother to COVID. So part of what we're talking about is that you have the power to help influence the thinking process that goes along with self-regulation. So by sharing your experiences, by sharing the things you've done to overcome hardship, will help students. Another source is turning to inspirational stories and people that you may know that can also help in this process. We know that when we read the stories of those who have experienced hardship, our mind takes on their stories as if it was ourselves. What does that mean? That means if you are reading selections of memoirs of those who've journeyed through very difficult times, that the reader will imagine, not only imagine, but take on the attributes of that person. So we can help guide them through. And that's the second message. First message, find your people. Second message is that you have to understand you have the power to guide people through hard times. You have this power as an individual, and this comes through vulnerability sharing. This comes through talking through areas. What are the practical tips that we're doing in our school at the moment? Right now, we're in a mix between contact teaching and distance learning. My older students are in distance, and my younger are in contact teaching. For my older students, we're very concerned about well-being. And this is the big message that has to come from the leadership and has to come from the teachers. First thing is, how are you? And making sure that we understand how our students are doing isn't very important. Tonight, we'll be talking a little bit about Clanbeat, and I support Clanbeat's ideas because what it's helping us get is the feedback to how our students are doing and help show red flags when they're starting to have struggles. So looking for ways in which this is possible is important. Other practical tips I would share is that we are keeping a running list of the students we have very high concerns with, and then we have a list of students we have moderate concerns with. So we're monitoring these with different people. So the moderate list is maybe shared amongst teachers, whereas the high risk, we're looking with our psychologists, we're working with our learning support to find ways in which we can support each of these students. Some of the things, if you have autonomy in your classroom to make some decisions, it's about finding ways that the curriculum is matching the times. So if you're teaching science, can you bring in COVID science into your lessons? Can you have the students explore these on their own and help bring back information? So if your standards and curriculum around research and science, well, yes, this is a wonderful time to switch gears, find ways in which you can switch gears that the material is connected to the time period. We've empowered our student equity group right now to be involved with working on anti-discrimination practices. We're empowering others to have a voice and have action. We want to give students this kind of power, and this helps them with their self-regulation. If they feel that they're doing meaningful work and connected work to others, this helps the process of building well-being during difficult times. But let's be realistic. having a small yoga session, or drinking a cup of tea might have been really great methods in under normal stressful times. But we're under extreme stress. We need to look at the data of others who've survived extreme stress and look for what works for them. So I've spoken a lot here. Maybe, Trine, you want to pull some questions in for others, or ask me something.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. Maybe you could speak a little bit more about this balance between the social emotional side of what's going on and still the curriculum standards, which we all might still be feeling pressure from.
Yes. I think if you look at the heart of most standards, they're not so focused on content. They're focused on skills. Most have moved to a skill-based approach. So if you're worried about content coverage, you're going to lose during the COVID time. There's no way you're going to be able to cover what you've covered before, and you're going to feel that you're failing at what you're working on. But if you can move your focus to skill building, this is what's most important. So this is what we've talked to parents about as well. It's not so important that they're reading these particular types of texts and answering these kinds of questions. Are you reading with your children? Are the children reading? So switching from skill focused from content focused is very, very important. If you're in a school district that is super focused on content, then we have to allow the students to have time to explore that content during their day, where they're not feeling rushed between class to class as well then. So are you giving time during your lessons, if that's what you have to focus on because you have external pressure? So if you have the autonomy to move towards skill-based standards, you focus on the skills and you focus on the students being empowered for those skills. If you have to cover content, you've got to give them time. You've got to give students time to have the ability to research and dive deep into that content.
Mm-hmm. And we also know that there could be some of the students or some of the teachers who are really in quite deep crises. Like, do you have any special measurements or mechanisms in place on how you identify them and work with them?
So looking at teachers, what we're seeing, and actually I had a meeting about it today. We all understand that all of us are having an ebb and flow in our ability to handle what's happening. So we want to see that we too are sharing that we have days that we can handle and we have capacity, and days that we don't. Recognizing the vulnerability we have as individuals and as leadership is extremely important. It's important for me to say there are days I go home and cry and I break down. And that others know that that's okay, and that it's very important to tell others when you're not doing well. Where I'm at in Finland, we have the ability to send people to our occupational psychologists and other sources of help. You might not have that in your community. So it's like, how do you find the resources in your community to get help and help counsel your teachers? The message we're giving to teachers at the moment is less is more. Cut back. We're telling cut back on content, cut back on big initiatives, cut back on worrying what you did 2 years ago. Focus on making sure the kids are okay, and focus on individualization, if possible, on others. But we can't put this burden on us that we can be like we were 2 years ago in our teaching practice. And this guilt many teachers have often drives this issue. Some of you are dealing with terrible, terrible grief, as I've spoken before. I have a good friend who in February lost her stepfather. In March, we lost a friend to cancer, our mutual friend. In April, she lost her father to COVID. And in December of last year, she lost her mother to cancer. So she's a teacher, she's in Massachusetts, and she's still trying to, make her lesson plans and take care of everything. But we have to honor that she has gone through terrible hardship. And a good administration is going to try to give support and saying, you know, if you need to take off, if you need to do what you need to do, that's more important at this moment. We need to support you.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a question from the audience as well about like what to do if there are really the teachers who cannot be of this positive example at that point of time. Like how do you work with them and support and empower?
Yeah, I think it's really hard, and we've had some teachers who we've had to give permission to have extended absences for them to have some time to recover. So that's one method we've had. I think the most important technique, if you want to call it a technique, is, you know, when we're feeling overwhelmed, trying to find ways in which we can reduce decision making, I think, is very important. This is what I talk with my teachers about a lot. Just like with students in the home, if they have simple routines that happen every day, those students usually have better behavior outcomes. They have better self-management. So we talk about training our teachers in this as well. What does your day-to-day routine look like? How can you remove decisions so that you're less overwhelmed? So like for myself, like every morning I always eat oatmeal. Like it's religious practice to eat oatmeal every morning. But like I don't have to make a decision about that. I often, you know, wear a suit every day. I don't have to think about, am I going to wear a suit or not? So I'm taking away decision making so I can help get through at the moment. For me, the most important thing that helps me individually is to say, what I do is meaningful, and I'm gonna get out of bed this morning, and I'm gonna get myself to school or online or whatever I need to do, because I care about my students and I want to be there for them, and I want to stand sturdy for them. And this sometimes helps us in this psychological switch. I'm working for the service of others, helps us oftentimes when we are at our lower selves.
Thank you, Kathleen. And dear audience, if you have any more questions, please feel free to share them, and we'll have extra time before the end of the webinar to address some of the more questions also that could be coming directly at Kathleen as well. Thank you. But next on, we shall move into the academic perspective, and I would like to invite Greta Arro to speak to us. And Greta's background is in neuroscience and educational psychology, so that we'll hear also a bit of more what does the science say about the current situation, and also see if we can learn any practical strategies from there.
Thank you so much, Trine, and thank you for having me. This neuroscience part was a little inspiration, but it's okay. Meanwhile, I just say that when you hear a strange voice or sound, then it's my dog who is snoring while I'm speaking, so I hope it won't disturb you. I try to speak louder than the sound, but it's really calming, you know. And today, what I like to share with you is one topic that me and my colleagues or my team in Tallinn University were really occupied with already before COVID, because I think many of us felt lonely even before COVID. Many of us felt that they don't have good relationships. Many of us worked hard but didn't succeed in academic settings. Or many of us felt that they don't really know how to concentrate. So the question that we posed already before COVID, but that wasn't really getting so much attention, was the question how to help children to regulate themselves and to help them or to know what to do if they don't know what to do, which is called metacognition. And now I also share my screen. Just a second. And I want to shed light a little bit on some topics related to something we really held so important here in Estonia, and slowly starting getting some. Sorry, I have trouble with sharing. Okay, so it's okay. It's not so important, maybe. Just a moment. Okay, I try again. How is it now?
It's all good, Greta.
Thank you. Yeah, and yes, actually there are many topics. It's not the only one, but we see that this is maybe one of the most important things that we overlook here in really, in some sense, really successful educational system. But at the same time, we see that this success is based on sometimes on teachers who regulate their students themselves. So actually students do not need to regulate themselves at all. They don't need to understand how to study or how to regulate their emotions or how to understand what's going on with them. And despite we try to turn attention on that before the crisis kicked in before we somehow went through with that issue. And now it's much more difficult to teach our students or even ourselves to be more competent in regulating ourselves or understanding what's happening with us than it was before that crisis, because now everyone are concerned with other topics as well, and also it's so hard to learn something so difficult. And actually the question that I'm posing, or this maybe not even question, but what we offer here is, from one side it's very simple, and from other side really complicated. This is an idea that the student should know more about his or her brain works, how his or her thinking, emotions, learning processes, belief system, and so on, how they actually work, how they function. And that means metacognition is a vague term, or maybe not so vague, but it's defined really differently by different scientists. But definitely it means that one is really aware of their own thinking and also conscious. That means that I know from one side, I know theoretically, for example, how something works in my mind. And at the same time, I also know practically what is happening with me at this certain moment. I might know some things about concentration, for example, or attention. But when I'm not able to understand where is my attention at this really very moment, and what can I do with it in this moment, then it's not fully what metacognition or self-regulated learning means. And to encourage you, I just say that here in Estonia, we are quite often in trouble in helping teachers to understand that teaching someone about self-regulation or metacognition, it's not telling them what to do. This is what happens in many cases when we talk about those topics. For example, when we talk about learning strategies, then what we get is that teachers tell students what to do. But as we all know, telling somebody what to do isn't really effective learning. So the big question is how to create that kind of learning context where students can start to find those expert knowledge from inside of themselves, so from themselves. So first, of course, they should know that kind of information, but secondly and thirdly, they should be in some situation where they get, for example, prompts, metacognitive prompts in the as a first step, and later on they could internalize those prompts. So learning about to regulate yourself is learning like all other things we can learn, whether it's grammar or swimming or whatever. So telling somebody isn't enough. We should try try and retrieve and so on. And I bring you some examples just to show you how broad is the topic. Maybe previously metacognition was defined strictly as thinking about your thinking, but actually more and more we notice and we know that also our emotions are so much related with how we think about them. So actually we know that our emotions are oftentimes evoked by our interpretations of what was happening. And also we know today, but maybe this knowledge is not so widely distributed in student population, that that there are also some, some universal rules how our emotions work. For example, when we know that our ability to inhibit some kind of ideas or interpretations that come to mind, and when we have bad feelings, then always bad memories want to arise in our mind, in our working memory, then this is something that brings you into the kind of ruminative practicing, and this will stabilize or keep up your bad emotions. So, for example, when students would know that when I don't consciously stop myself ruminating over something, then my mood cannot be better, because I'm learning my bad interpretations. I'm learning this bad emotion because I'm going it over and over again, which is learning. So actually what we think is that students should have this theoretical knowledge also about their brain, not everything, but there are certainly some things that might help them so that they are not acting randomly with their emotions, but know better what to do. And also I have noticed that when I talk about the emotion regulation with teachers, then they say that, okay, but we don't know how to handle our emotions either. So actually this is quite universal knowledge for all of us, to parents, to students, to school children, to teachers. And so we should have this theoretical knowledge, and also we should have some practical knowledge. What are the strategies? We know that studies about emotion regulation strategies are so they have so long history already, and we know that there are wise ways and less wise ways, adaptive ways and maladaptive ways to regulate our emotions. And the way how we regulate our emotions are deeply tied or related to how well we cope actually emotionally. So how do we lead ourselves slowly into the deeper depression, anxiety, or we don't? Because what is the rule in life is that bad things happen in everyone's life. Bad things happen, but the question is how we cope with emotions. When we have good emotion regulation strategies, then bad things won't lead us into emotional problems or disorders. This is rather likely. And just to bring you an example, a really broad example of those strategies, which are not well known by students, I would say, but students already in early teenage years are able to learn them, because emotion regulation strategies are teachable and people can learn them. Would be all kind of strategies that try to reappraise the situation, to give some positive, for example, positive reappraisal would be one example. So what can I learn from the situation? And it sounds really trivial. It sounds unbelievable that something so simple or simplistic can work. But based on many studies made with populations who have really some sort of like chronic trouble, some kind of chronic disease or something, it has been shown that their emotional or psychological well-being depend a lot of those regulation strategies. So some more examples: changing the perspective of the situation, this positive reappraisal, making some plans, accepting, and those all are things we can make with our own mind, and they are kind of invisible, and so are less wise ways to regulate emotions. One I just previously mentioned, rumination is one way that we also silently might do, but this will lead to not so good adaptation and coping. So just to leave it there, just to bring in another topic that can be related with many bad emotions as well. It's our achievement, learning. And I really agree with everyone who say that actually this is not the time to achieve or to try to be the best or achiever. Maybe this is time to learn. Maybe this time is given to us to learn something about ourselves and about psyche. And
I would like to really end with this thought that it's really this big question mark, at whether it's time for achievements or not. But let us try to tie now together what we have a bit heard from Kathleen and what we also now heard from Greta, you, and see what Kadri has to add us to the story. And so that we can, then after the end of it, also come back to the questions.
Wonderful, thank you.
And I would like to introduce Kadri, our next speaker. And so Kadri is the founder and CEO of Clanbeat, a new and up-and-coming startup with the focus on well-being and also self-directed learning. And Kadri, would you be so kind to introduce us a bit more about Clanbeat?
Hi, welcome. And as Trine already mentioned, then that in Clanbeat, we are really taking care of how to support students on the learning and also on their well-being journey. And those topics which Kathleen and Grete just now shared with us has been with us already with our minds when we have been talking about how to really support students. And I would love to share you with my slides. And I hope that we can all see them. We have come up with a solution actually, which is supporting those topics which Kathleen and Grete were mentioning, because we have been working together with them to come up with the solution. And when we started this journey together, we went to many schools and talked to hundreds of students, of teachers and school leaders, and really listened to them. What are those things which are troubling them the most? And we started this journey in the beginning of COVID. And the reflections which we got from the schools were that actually this time brought really vividly out the reason that learning to learn skills and social emotional skills are becoming more and more important at the times like this. And we have taken this co-creation process very seriously, because we really believe that at the times like this, the most important thing is actually to respond to the real problems. And what has been also really important to us is to really listen to students themselves, not only educators. And students have given us really precious and vital information on how to really support them the best in the times where they are actually struggling as well. And what we found out is that while their learning activities and academic results might go up, then they are having anxiety, they are having stress, and having really hard times of designing their days, and feeling really isolated. And to those problems, we came up with a solution together with Grete, who you just saw here, and with Kathleen as well, and many students, that we really found out that supporting students in taking active role in their learning and life is the key to overcoming those troubles which students and schools are facing at the moment, and giving the power to students and taking them on a continuous improvement journey of planning, acting, and reflecting. And if we are looking at the foundational skills which are supporting those activities, then we are talking about social emotional skills and learning to learn skills, and those are all baked together into helping students to be adaptable to this kind of world we are living in. As right now, we don't know what's happening next week or next year. So the main skills students are going to be focusing on is adaptability. And if we are talking about student autonomy and well-being, then these are really highly related, meaning that if students cannot be autonomous on their decisions and really finding out those small and big aspects about themselves and how do they function the best, then the student well-being is going down as well. So we are supporting both of those sides. And how did we do that? If you're talking about Google Classroom, then we came up with a really useful integration. And as we know that Google Classroom is really good at setting up tasks by teachers and distributing them to the whole class. But what Clanbeat does is giving it an extra layer in a way that students can actually, if we go back to the first slide, then they can reflect on those assignments which were assigned to them and really tap into those things which are affecting them, how do they learn the best, and really own those. So we could be able to give them this active role in learning. And how might we do it? If you're integrating Google Classroom with Clanbeat, then those tasks which you're setting up in Google Classroom are going automatically to Clanbeat. And they can be accessed by students there and giving all those social, emotional, and learning to learn possibilities which we are providing. And for well-being support, which is really dear to us, we have taken several measurements. For example, all those tasks which are coming into Google Classrooms are being able to peg with emotions. So students can actually pinpoint how do they feel towards those tasks for themselves, and they are able to relate to them better. So they are understanding which kind of tasks are taking them down and which kind of tasks are giving them energy. And also they are able to reflect on after each task completion, how did it go? What did I learn about this? What are my next steps? And this reflection can be done also individually regarding tasks or no tasks. So students can keep mini e-diary for themselves and keep tracking their own journey and their well-being. Also, with well-being, we are supporting daily pulse service, and we are asking from the students how they are doing daily. What is their mental level, how they have been sleeping, did they have any positive social reactions, and based on this information, we are able to reflect the data back to themselves and also to the teachers who are supporting those students. And this kind of information goes into teacher overview. So homeroom teacher or the school support team actually have an overview of how the students are really doing and have this first layer of checking in digitally, so they can do meaningful interventions and have student support in a much more personalized level. And also from those reflections which students are doing, we are showing aggregated data to the school and reflecting it back. What is also really good about this integration is that teachers are getting red and green flags based on the data analysis we are doing. So all of this information which students are doing with their planner and with their daily well-being check-ins, they are being aggregated into the teacher's overview, where they are able to get personalized information about their students and really hone in into those places where it's really needed. So this takes away the time for teachers to having to do check-in calls or just assuming how everybody's doing. So this data is really visible and they can deal with those who are actually needing it the most. But this is actually not all, because as Grete mentioned, and we agree a lot with the need of students taking also responsibility over the learning and life, and having the tools and the data about themselves as well. So what we have done is that we are reflecting the data back to students as well. So they would be able to understand how they function the best. For example, if students are doing the daily, or it's possible to do it also weekly, the check-ins, they are taking the moment for themselves and thinking, how am I really doing? And this is already a really good start for noticing yourself inside this turmoil we are all in. And also having the chance to reflect on your tasks and understanding how you learn the best. So these are the times where students are actually able to understand themselves much better, and having this data aggregation for themselves as well, and also useful feedback. And how it works for students is that students are getting notifications with the questions, which are designed to really support them. And they're having their personal dashboard with their all information in it. And if you're an educator and you have a classroom full of students whom you care about and to whom you really want to support and give the means for them to understand themselves better, but also to be able to support them and really look into the overall level of how your students are doing, then this is possible to have the usage of Clanbeat for free for your class, and also have the Google integration within it. So with this, you're able to have the class level analytics and early noticing and trends, and you're able to communicate with your students and really have meaningful reflections and support your students. And what is most important, students are getting their knowledge and tools of how to support themselves as well. And if you want to get started now, so please go to clanbeat.com or download this application from Google Play or Apple Store. And if you're thinking about not only about your class, or are you thinking about your whole school, then for school, we are having the school-wide solution where it is possibility to use it with all the selected grades. There's a possibility to have school-wide analytics for having this kind of better understanding of how your school is doing and what kind of classes needs additional support, and how to do very good leadership decisions based on that, and take immediate action, because at the times like these, we cannot wait until we are having yearly reviews and with the students and the parents, with the teacher and parent conferences. So this actually has to happen live, and we are offering this possibility for all of the schools worldwide. And for kicking it off, we are also offering support webinars for your school educators to get everybody on board really quickly, and having the supportive community and the materials also to talk about social emotional learning, reflecting, noticing each other well-being, and also setting meaningful goals. And this is it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write to me. And I'm really inviting you to go into clanbeat.com to investigate more. And looking for questions out of Triin.
Thank you very much, Kadri. I would like to actually maybe kick off this question session with all of us now. And perhaps the first thing, Grete, maybe together with you, we can look back into the question about the self-regulation. And what would you say could be some of those practical things? Because also Kathleen has mentioned the importance of routines, and Kadri as well indirectly talked about different important little activities that you could do. But I'm really curious about this, personal like self-regulation, and what would be your suggestions for some of the first steps into this?
Do you mean to the student directly or for teachers or both?
Let's look at both maybe even, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so actually this is very, very difficult question because it's a wide self-regulation. It's related with our, quite basic functions like attention and working memory and so on. And also we self-regulate more higher processes and also emotions and yeah, learning in general. So actually what is maybe the most important practical advice for everyone is that it is learnable. You can change your ability to self-regulate because we just read a wonderful study from Heimovitz, Dweck and Wolfgang from this summer, which they published, and where they just teach to 4 and 5 years old children that self-regulating could be fun. It could be energizing. And they remade this marshmallow test, marshmallow experiment. They made it with gummy bears or those another different kind of candies. But the point was that when you give people just the knowledge about what is self-regulation, and that can actually be not like threatening experience or something that makes it tired, but this can be really invigorating or energizing thing. Then even 5 years old can really spontaneously change their ability to regulate themselves, to find more spontaneous strategies to keep their spontaneous behaviors back and not to act upon them. So actually our knowledge about how malleable all those skills are, whatever you're struggling with, is it ability to concentrate, is it ability to go through long text, ability to communicate with others, whatever would be your trouble. It's changeable, but sometimes we say it just as a as an empty word. But for understanding how to develop those skills, we need to know that it needs small steps. It needs that somebody who helps you, some expert, some teacher, knows how to change this environment step by step, or a little bit every day, a little bit less protecting or less supporting, so that you can start to regulate yourself, your own, but not abruptly. So actually, there is a whole world of advice, which actually is quite practical.
Mm-hmm. But maybe one of the things we could really take away from this is to start from smaller steps,
Yeah.
so that the big changes cannot happen overnight. And maybe this is also the reason for coming back to the question of routines. And perhaps, Kathleen, you could talk about some of the routines that you have also established on organizational level, like some of these things that also generate these necessary and positive behaviors, and also perhaps even helping us to develop certain skills of that level as well.
Well, one of the things we did recently was that we set aside our normal Wednesday meeting. We normally have a staff meetings that happen on Wednesday in small groups and other pieces. And we decided that we would have once a month well-being sessions that individuals at our school would lead for others, talking about what works for them and what might be helpful, or they would share something that might be relaxing. So we had, for example, one group that was baking bread at home, and we were all in our different locations. I gave a talk about maximizing your health with nutrition. We had various kinds of events. So one of the things that we were establishing in our school is that we're having these conversations. What works for you, and how might I help you? And also giving people the autonomy to share their skills. So that was one thing that we worked on. And in terms of the routines with schools, communication is always incredibly important in a school, and during times of uncertainty, knowing how we're going to generally respond to something each time gives reassurances to the staff as well. So they know that when a new proclamation, so like last Thursday, we got a message that we're going into a mini lockdown here in Helsinki. And so we have certain procedures of how we're going to communicate this to parents and how we're going to communicate to students, how we're going to communicate to each other, and how we're going to reassure each other so that it feels like there's some kind of pattern, even though we're making some stuff up as we go along. But people feel secure in patterns, and some of the patterns that we can continue at our school that are helpful, for example, is that we have always had a long history of outdoor learning at our school. So this is something we really dug into with our community. So could we find greater ways to get people out? Can we have meetings that are outside? Can we have walking meetings with others that are outside so we could take down our face masks possibly and talk to each other or feel a little bit more comfortable talking to each other? So trying to find ways that we were enhancing what we knew were our strengths that helped serve us during this time period has been helpful. And a lot of it is just thinking through with the community, thinking through, for example, with my parent-teacher association, we have a weekly meeting where we meet and say, okay, where are we at now? How are the parents feeling? What should we think about? How do we change this activity that can now maybe be online? How do we support new families? How do we support students who are just entering in our school? We have a constant turnover in our international school of new kids. So digging into what you do well, I think, is important as a community, and reminding each other that you do this well. I reminded my staff today that if you were to speak to the students, the younger ones who are coming every day, they're still really happy to come to school, and they know that we have a loving community. And I spoke to my staff and said, this is our strength. Let's not forget this, that we haven't lost this during this hard time. We have loved each other. We have taken care of each other. And we can be proud of what we've done during these times.
Thank you. We have also got a few more questions. And Kadri, there's also, I think, what also has been always like here said as well is that we've got to keep talking to each other, and these well-being practices or having these check-ins, that there's a question like, have these been also used with school teachers and administrators as well besides the students, or what do you know about it?
Yes, very good question. Actually, I feel that educators are really important, and they need to have a very good base for actually going into interacting with students. And in Clanbeat, we are having the possibility for educators to check in with themselves as well and have this overview for themselves as well. So having this mindfulness about yourself as well, and walking the walk. So you are actually eating your own dog food, what you are teaching the students as well. And if we are talking about connecting with yourself and with students, then very good practice, what has been happening in the schools is that teachers are having this kind of habits, good habits, what Kathleen was talking about as well, and good practices that they are doing weekly reflections, which they're sharing with a homeroom teacher and checking in this human level with each other. But I've heard that many of the educators are reflecting to themselves as well and having this kind of mini diary of their own findings, insights, and what is bringing them down and what is giving them energy in the same environment, and having this personal overview of data reflection back to them as well, because keeping an eye on yourself on the times like this is really, really important. And because if you're not well, then it's really hard to be there for the students.
Yes. And with all the information sharing, there's always this concept of trust and safety also, which is really important, so that people would be ready to share their ideas with others. And there's also a question, maybe perhaps, which I would leave Kathleen with you, is that like if people are not so enthusiastic first maybe to share their data for the fear of either being categorized or labeled somehow. That how have you encouraged that? And also, I know your school is also implementing Clanbeat. Then, for example, how would you, or what have you used to convince the students that it is actually a safe place for doing so, and that they don't have any backlashes from it to it?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about here in Europe is this GDPR regulations about safe data. And so it's very important that anything that we introduce to the school is meeting those needs. So the students are well aware of their data protection rights, and we talk them through this and other apps that we might be using, that this is something that's been vetted, and it's not like Facebook or WhatsApp that is possibly stealing and selling your data. We want to have a protected environment, and this is one of the reasons that we're very happy with Clanbeat, that this is a safe location for groups to talk and discuss.
Mm-hmm. So, with these words, I would like to say a big thank you for everyone who came today or will be watching this webinar a bit later with us. And you were seeing Clanbeat's cooperation with Google for education. And hopefully, we've got many nice cooperation and many nice ideas that will start up from this. So, all the best to you. Please make sure that you can keep yourself well so that you can also take care of the well being of others. All the best. Take care. Bye.